Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, and regulatory landscape and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining us this afternoon, we have Brian Huckstep, Chief Investment Officer of Advyzon Investment Management, Hannan Happi, CEO of Exowatt, and Kyle Okamoto, Chief Technology Officer of Aethir. We're here to discuss infrastructure investments that align with future needs and regulatory environments. It is great to have all of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talk, certainly a relevant conversation for Climate Week NYC taking place the 21st to the 28th of this month. And Brian, let's kick it off with you. I mean, the reinvigorated conversation around the energy transition has been brought on by this demand, this insatiable demand for AI and emerging technologies, and it really has ignited this conversation again. What are your thoughts about it as it relates to the supply and the demand part of the equation?
Yeah, we've seen some stock prices really run up over the last year on some of these exciting ideas where AI really just, it demands so much energy, and it's terrific that it's coming from varied sources. And some of the problems with the clean energy is that a lot of the clean energy is only really produced during the day. You have problems with wind and solar that they're not produced steadily throughout the day and night. So it's terrific that we're getting a mixed source. You're getting some nuclear in there, some hydro, and that's been reflected in some of the prices of the producers and transmission companies both.
Yeah, and Hanan, this is really going to come down to integrating planning, where it's not just going to be a public or private initiative, but public-private partnerships, and thinking about data center development in a more strategic way.
Yeah, I mean, to what Brian is saying, I think renewable sources like solar and wind are extremely cost effective today and can be easily deployed and are probably the fastest solution for solving the AI power problems. If you can solve for the dispatchability aspect of it, which is what we're really focused on at Exowatt, is providing a 24/7 solution which combines solar capture with a long duration battery. And at the end of the day, this is going to be deployed for projects both where data centers are co-located behind the meter, but also in integration with utilities. And so, as you said, it's both a public and private matter. The good news is that the AI power demand is so strong today and so insatiable, as you said, that everyone's investing as much as they can in all sorts of solutions, and we're excited to be able to contribute to that, especially since ultimately the AI power race is going to be won by the countries that have solved the power problem, and in that respect, we're far behind China.
Yeah. And Kyle, you bring up an interesting point that transmission efficiency is really what's going to drive performance, that 5% of US electricity is lost in transit. Tell us more about that and what can be used to improve these efficiencies.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us, Jill. I would say that the grid's biggest problem, isn't the wires, right? It isn't the 5% of transmission loss. It's the dumb compute at the end of them, right? I would say most people talk about fixing the grid with smart meters and better transmission lines, but we have to understand that the real issue is unpredictable, massive, and increasingly centralized demand for AI. Our AI clients, we operate the largest decentralized GPU network in the world. Our clients are not steady. They're not manageable loads. They're a series of massive, unpredictable spikes. And so I think you really have to think about orchestrating those compute resources, physically and located at the edge, closer to both the power generation and the user, and reduce those transmission losses and transform like a volatile load into a predictable, optimized flow. So I think it's more about not just using energy, but using it intelligently that we really have to kind of rally around.
Yeah. And Kyle, you bring up another interesting point too, that the strain that data centers place on city power grids and water supplies in local communities in general. So it's not only just the technical part of the equation, there's also policy and, getting the buy-in from the communities where you're trying to create these massive data centers. Like what are the incentives, in other words?
Yeah, and plus two, your point's spot on, because that also puts a single massive data center next to a power plant as basically just a single point of failure, right? And there's a massive demand side strain on the local grid. And so I think what you really need is still massive, obviously the AI revolution is upon us, but you need to have it be a distributed network. You need to have thousands of individual nodes around the world to host and share compute and turn every underutilized GPU around and every available power source around into these kind of micro colo concepts and spread the load, right? Enhance resilience. and fundamentally reduce the need for costly transmission infrastructure between these, mega data centers. So while Microsoft, just did another announcement, we're going to, spend $80 billion building out some new facility in Missouri, like that's great, but that's going to only really help that area. And God forbid something happens in that local area, it's going to cause a cascading failure elsewhere. So I think it's really about rethinking how we've gone about building the cloud in the last 20 years, because the centralized cloud that we built in the last 20 years is not going to work for AI tomorrow and today.
Yeah. I mean, that's an excellent point that you bring up. And Brian, it goes back to your notes as well, where you have to create these incentives to change consumption practices and allow for diversification. Because at the end of the day, to Kyle's point, if you have a single point of failure, how do you triage that, right? Because Microsoft makes an $80 billion investment. Does it go there, or does it go to a trauma center, or does it go to supply local communities in their homes? I mean, you have to think about how you're going to triage this at the end of the day.
And the market is an elegant factor toward moving assets to the right place. So when we think about the winners and losers from an investing point of view in these markets, it's going to be people who can keep the compute fast. So the upshot of overloading some of these things at certain points and the need we expect more demand than supply, and that's been a growing problem. It's going to be about speed and the users or the producers of the compute who can keep it fast, who can move compute around. Things like encouraging learning to happen when users are not online, or maybe encouraging learning to happen, which is a high demand on the CPUs. To happen when maybe there's less expensive energy available. That's really important, and the market really does help with that. And it falls to the bottom line for a lot of these corporations. So there's been a lot of academic work that I've read related to this about that, and the corporations who incorporate it most effectively, we think are going to be some of the winners.
Yeah, I mean, Hannan, at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to integrating planning that drives a more efficient environment when you're thinking about, renewable energy integration, because you do have legacy systems that are still going to need to be integrated, but then also thinking about building diversified, sustainable, adaptable solutions moving forward as well.
Yeah, I think Kyle mentioned a good point. The future of the energy grid and also data centers and distributed energy resources, microgrids that I think are going to be spun up to take advantage of both capacity that exists in the grid from a planning perspective. There are a lot of technologies that are being developed that way. But also a lot of these technologies, like what we're developing at Exowatt, are essentially distributed energy resources that can take the strain away from the grid, where you don't have to sit in these interconnection queues for such a long time, and takes the pressure away from utilities. And the future, I genuinely believe, is decentralized and distributed. And that's a lot of where technologies are going to as well.
Yeah, I mean, Hannan, another, when we think about this acceleration in sustainable future as well, it's not just to supply the demand for these AI technologies, but it's also down to U.S. competitiveness, and you can even argue national security as well. So there's going to have to be some flexibility on the policy side as well. I mean, we all know to get a grid online could take 10 years, and part of that is the real estate and permitting process. If we want to maintain that competitiveness and environment where technology is evolving so quick and the time to adapt to it is compressing, it's going to require some policy rethinking too.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about data center power in the US, it's about 20 gigawatts today, and it's supposed to go up to 80 gigawatts by 2030. So we need to add 60 gigawatts of power in the span of 5 years. And technically that might be possible, but from a policy perspective, as you said, the permitting, all that stuff takes potentially a decade or more. And in the meantime, China can add 60 gigawatts to the grid in 2 months. So from a national security perspective, again, this is massive, massive risk that we have. Again, we can argue we're losing the AI race as much as we want to be winning on the AI application front. We're losing on the power front. And that requires some massive rethinking of policy. I think the current administration is pushing towards some of this policy changes for data center power. But we also have to kind of recognize the supply chain constraints and challenges we have in the US that are not being able to meet the demand signal right now.
Yeah. And Brian, this is where your thesis comes in, where transmission is an attractive area to invest because the administration isn't they're removing clean energy incentives. So if you're thinking about it through the investment lens, transmission sounds as if it's going to be the more attractive area.
That's right. Some of the U.S. centric thought that's been going on for the last couple of years, keeping the best chips in the U.S., some of that is a little bit detrimental to just development and compute overall around the globe. You can imagine if we did have completely free borders, that compute would go to the place where it's least expensive, where the energy is the least expensive, and where the compute power is the strongest. But instead, and understandably, we are, for many reasons, focusing that in the US. So it will be a little more expensive by doing that. And that's typically the case. When you are a little bit protective and close your borders, prices go up a little bit, and we should expect that. But eventually, as this kind of compute and this work becomes a little more commoditized, we expect to see global competitors really jump ahead and provide some really, really good growth. So we're watching in the US and abroad for those reasons.
And Kyle, what's interesting is that you can leverage this AI to improve forecasting as it relates to supply and demand. So it's the energy that you're providing, you're supplying the demand for can actually help to make these ratios more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, we have to use our own technology to support this industry. And I think the clearest value is in technologies and infrastructure that's going to make transmission smarter, right? Advanced monitoring, load balancing, forecasting, distributed training models, et cetera, giving customers, enterprises, innovators, startups, et cetera, the access to compute that has really been only held for those that can afford it today. And I think democratizing those valuable resources will only help in the long run, right? By bringing on more innovators onto the mix in a more distributed, localized fashion, borders aside, right? People need compute all around the world, not just in the US. And I think that, our clients today are going to be some of the smartest people that are going to change the world in the future that will help transmission be smarter.
Well, Kyle, let's contextualize it for a moment here because Hannan had made the point 20 gigawatts in the US now going to 80 by 2030, I believe was the increase, which is quite glaring. How much power is that? Does it power 500,000 homes? Does it power a data center? What are we looking at in terms of the supply here?
I mean, the short answer is not enough. It's just simply not enough. When you think about the insatiable need for these resources going forward around the world, US obviously having a large amount of the data centers in the world, it's a wonderful stride. But Hannan very smartly mentioned that China can easily build that in a matter of months, not years. So I think it's definitely not enough. But I would say moreover, the way it's being built is not appropriate. It is a centralized, restrictive model, basically building toll roads. And I think that's the wrong or older way of thinking. And our mission is the exact opposite, right? Think of it as a distributed nervous system rather than a toll road for AI, right? Building foundational infrastructure that senses or reacts or self-optimizes in real time, handing it out to the community, being monitored and policed and rewarded by the community, I think is going to be a much better way than allowing 5 or 6 companies to build out all the AI infrastructure in the United States.
Yeah. Brian, what about the existing infrastructure and upgrading it to become more adaptable? Are we just not even focusing on that, or it's only on new builds?
Well, certainly the existing infrastructure is very, very important, has lower costs in many ways. When you use the existing infrastructure, you don't need to build from the ground up. So there are procedures in place, systems in place. So there's definitely benefit to being a little bit more evolutionary with existing processes than revolutionary. So yeah, like I say, benefit there. It's a little more understandable, a little more dependable. You know what you're going to get. And from an investing point of view, that makes investors for sure a little more comfortable.
How come we don't hear as much about that then? And it's just about new projects or focusing on nuclear and not the existing technology that's in place and just, give it a remodel.
I mean, some of those are running full tilt already. You heard about coal a couple of years ago during during the election cycle. So some of those things flare up, but a lot of them are running full tilt already. And so it's the new innovations that are really the additive that are going to move the needle in the right direction. Toward hopefully less expensive electricity, more dependable electricity, and just a better product for everybody.
Yeah. And I'll ask you that question in a different way. We have these lofty goals not necessarily goals, but demand that has to be met by 2030 as an example. Is it attainable?
Yeah, I mean, to your earlier question, how much power is this? 60 gigawatts is the equivalent of about 60 million households of power that has to be added to the grid. So a standard data center, if it's 100 megawatt, is consuming about 100,000 the equivalent of 100,000 households of energy. And so what to your question to Brian about like why not remodeling the existing solutions, it's because it's the first time the US is actually experiencing a load growth. We had been kind of stagnating and we were flattening, and now we're actually experiencing a load growth, and its load growth is so significant that by 2030, data centers are projected to consume 10 to 12% of total electricity generation in the US. And the reality is we don't have that capacity. We have to add that capacity. And the only way to add that capacity is kind of dispatchable renewable energy sources and other dispatchable sources, maybe like natural gas generators that can come online today. Newer technologies like nuclear and others, they will take a long time to come online, and they're not really going to be addressing this load growth that we have to address. And so that's a real challenge to solve for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kyle, you also have to address the workforce as well. Do we have the workforce and the proper skills in place to achieve in 3.5 years that type of 4.5 years, 3.5 years, that kind of demand?
Yeah, I mean, I think by the end of last year, there was over like 2.3 gigawatts of generation and storage just simply waiting, right? Because transmission wasn't there, right? Backlogging grid capacity. So I think it's beyond just transmission. It's people, it's facilities, et cetera. But again, that's just pushing a wet rope up a steep hill. And what we've been doing for the last 20 years, when we need more data centers, we build one. I think it really takes a wholesale inventory assessment on how we're doing things, and investing in additional generation won't solve shortages or bottlenecks if the existing infrastructure is unable to carry it. And so I think we need a much better focus on, sustainability in both transmission efficiency, also in utilization, but, economically shifting the entire model away from the current centralized, fashion of building cloud. I just don't think that's going to work for the AI future.
All right. Appreciate all of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.